What would you do if the person you trusted most, the one you built a life with, had been living a double life for years? Today's story is not just about betrayal. It's about the kind of truth you can't unsee once it's in front of you. This is a journey through love, deception, and the moment everything changes in a single hotel lobby. And trust me, you'll want to hear how it ends. Welcome to Cheating Stories 7, where real stories reveal the real cost of betrayal. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps us share more stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Now, let's step into the story of I caught my wife's 2-year affair at a hotel and served her divorce papers. My name is Daniel Hayes, and for 16 years, I truly believed I had built a marriage strong enough to withstand anything life could throw at us. We had 2 children, Ethan, our curious 9-year-old son who could spend hours dismantling a toy just to understand how it worked, and Lily, our 14-year-old daughter who had inherited her mother's sharp wit and my unshakable stubbornness. We lived in a quiet suburb outside of Denver, in a house that wrapped you in warmth the moment you walked through the door, the kind of place you could picture raising a family in, where laughter echoed through the hallways and the scent of home-cooked meals lingered long after dinner was over. I wasn't wealthy, but as a senior project engineer, I earned enough to give my family comfort and stability. Madeline, my wife, had worked her way up to a managerial position at a large advertising agency, a career she carried like a badge of honor. Between our incomes, we afforded family vacations, weekends at the lake, and opportunities for our children that neither of us had growing up. We were not perfect. In the early years, our arguments could be volcanic, 2 young, headstrong people colliding over bills, responsibilities, and the relentless pressures of parenthood. But over time, or so I believed, we learned to bend without breaking. We celebrated anniversaries with candlelit dinners, left little notes on the fridge, and hosted backyard barbecues where neighbors would smile and say we looked solid. I believed them. I believed us. Looking back now, I can see the faint hairline cracks, moments when Madeline seemed distracted, when her laughter didn't quite reach her eyes, when she turned away in bed claiming exhaustion. Back then, I explained it away, stress from work, parenting fatigue, passing moods. Still, I loved her deeply. I admired her drive, her effortless presence in any room, her ability to command attention without trying. I tried to be the husband who supported her ambitions, even when that meant eating takeout alone while she worked late. I handled school pickups, weekend projects, anything to keep our lives running smoothly. Betrayal was never something I imagined could happen to us. Affairs were for other couples, the ones who had stopped talking, who lived like strangers under the same roof. We weren't like that, or at least I thought we weren't. The irony is, I used to tell myself I was one of the lucky ones, lucky to have a wife who was still breathtaking after 16 years, lucky to have children who adored us both, lucky to live a life that felt steady. But stability, I would learn, can be the most dangerous illusion of all. Because while I was holding on to the image of an unshakable marriage, my wife had already begun building an entirely different life, one I was never meant to see. The shift didn't happen in a single night. It crept in quietly, like fog rolling over familiar streets, so slow at first that I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Madeline began coming home later than usual, her excuses wrapped in phrases like client dinners or urgent project meetings at the agency. At first, I accepted them without question. Her job was demanding, and I'd always admired her work ethic. But soon, the hours stretched longer. She would slip in quietly after midnight, the faint trail of her perfume lingering in the hallway, mixed with the subtle hint of wine and something else. A cologne I didn't recognize. The woman who once greeted me at the door with a kiss now barely looked up from her phone when I walked into the room. Conversations became clipped, perfunctory. I'd talk about a problem at work, and she'd respond with a distracted, uh-huh, her eyes fixed on her screen. When I asked what was so important, she'd tilt the phone away and mutter, "Just work stuff, Daniel." What cut even deeper were the comparisons, subtle at first, then bolder, until they became small wounds she didn't seem to care about inflicting. Greg would have known how to fix this, she'd remark if I struggled with a repair. Greg always makes time to take his wife out, she'd say when I suggested a weekend getaway. It wasn't only the comparisons. She stopped laughing at my jokes, stopped suggesting family movie nights, stopped reaching for my hand when we walked together. Every thoughtful thing I did, cooking her favorite pasta, surprising her with flowers, booking trips she once dreamed of, was met with lukewarm politeness, as if gratitude had become a chore. One night, lying in bed, I asked her quietly, "Maddie, are you happy with me?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling. Finally, she said, "Don't ask questions like that. You should already know the answer." I didn't know what she meant, but those words stuck. A splinter lodged under my skin. I threw myself into fixing whatever was wrong. I devoured books on rekindling intimacy, watched relationship advice videos late into the night, planned surprise date nights she either canceled at the last minute or endured with forced smiles. Then there were the phone calls, short, whispered, always taken in another room. Her voice softened into something I hadn't heard in years, but never when she spoke to me. Sometimes I'd catch her smiling at a message, her thumbs moving quickly until she noticed me. Then the phone would snap shut and the smile would vanish. When I confronted her, she laughed. "You're being paranoid, Daniel. Not everything is about you." But deep down, I knew. The warmth we'd built over 16 years had cooled into something brittle. And no matter how hard I tried to hold on, she was slipping away, piece by piece, into someone else's world. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of weekday that should have passed without notice. The kids were asleep, the dishwasher hummed in the kitchen, and the house wore that comfortable silence that makes you believe everything is fine. I was in the living room, scrolling through project notes on my laptop, when I heard Madeline's laughter drifting from our bedroom. Not the polite laugh she used at dinner parties. This was lighter, unguarded, the kind of laugh that escapes before you can decide to hold it in. I froze for a moment, listening. Another burst of laughter followed, then a soft, conspiratorial hush, as if she'd leaned in closer to whatever she was reading. When I walked into the bedroom, she was half sitting against the headboard, her hair damp from a shower, the glow of her phone lighting her face. The moment she saw me, she tilted the screen away in one quick, practiced motion. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Work," she replied too quickly. "Campaign nonsense." I raised an eyebrow. Nonsense must be pretty funny. Her mouth tightened. "Daniel, please, it's late." I climbed into bed beside her, pretending to watch a video on my laptop. But in the black reflection of the screen, I could see her thumbs moving, a photo flashing briefly, then the bubble of text that followed, then another. She angled the phone even farther toward the edge of the bed, like she was shielding a candle from the wind. When I leaned slightly closer, she sighed, slid off the mattress, and muttered, "I'm going to wash my face." The bathroom door closed, the lock clicked. Water ran, the fan whirred to life. I stared at the space she'd left behind. I'm an engineer. I believe in causes and effects, in problems that have solutions. But there's no equation for the sound your own wife makes when she's laughing with someone else. When she returned, I tried again. "Maddie, can I see your phone?" She froze just for a fraction of a second before offering a puzzled smile. "Why?" "Because I'm your husband and I'm going to sleep next to you. I need to know I'm crazy for even asking." Her eyes went cold, the warmth vanishing like a light switched off. "You don't get to police me." "I'm not policing you, I'm trying to breathe." She held my gaze for a beat, then handed me the phone unlocked. The gesture felt like a dare. The messages were clean, too clean. Threads that should have been full were reduced to a handful of polite exchanges. Names I'd seen dozens of times now showed almost nothing, jokes without setups, answers without questions. Gaps so obvious they screamed of deletion. "See," she said, her tone almost smug. "Satisfied?" I handed it back. "Not even close." She rolled her eyes, slid under the covers, and turned away. I lay awake, listening to the faint tap, tap, tap from her side of the bed until it finally stopped. By morning, I told myself to drop it. But by lunch, I was keeping mental tabs without even meaning to when she turned her phone face down at breakfast, the new passcode on her work tablet, the way she smiled when a message came and then overcorrected her expression to neutral. That evening, I tried a different approach, the language of vulnerability. "I'm scared," I told her quietly in the kitchen. "I feel like I'm losing you and I'm too late to admit it." For a moment, her eyes softened, then they shuddered. "Don't ask me to mother your insecurities. I'm asking you to talk to me. Then stop accusing me." She brushed past me toward the living room where her phone waited like a small, patient animal. That night, the laughter came again, softer this time, more controlled. When I shifted toward her, she jerked the phone away and snapped, "What are you doing?" As if I'd reached for something far more personal than a screen. She disappeared into the bathroom and stayed until the mirror fogged and my courage curdled into something heavier. When she finally returned, she slid into bed with her back to me. "You need to trust me," she said, but it didn't sound like a request. It sounded like a verdict. Trust is a bridge you build together, but I could feel every plank creaking under my feet while she walked across it weightless, never looking back. Engineers fix things by mapping what's broken, so I started mapping. I bought a small spiral notebook and drew 3 columns: date, event, discrepancy. I wasn't trying to be a detective. I was trying to keep my sanity. Friday, client dinner, home at 1:12 a.m., faint scent of a cologne that wasn't mine. Saturday, strategy off-site, but the office phone system confirmed they were closed on weekends. Sunday, 2:03 a.m., shower on immediately, no eye contact. The pattern looked like a heartbeat on a monitor I didn't want to read. I knew I needed more than suspicion. I called my old college friend Mark, a quiet, methodical guy who now worked in IT security. I told him I needed help recovering family photos from an old phone. He didn't pry, just said, "Bring the device and a charger. If there's anything left, I'll find it." That night, while Madeline took Lily to a study group and Ethan was at a sleepover, I pulled her so-called dead backup phone from the desk. The battery icon blinked red. I plugged it in and waited. When the lock screen finally lit up, my hands shook in a way they never did when cutting power to a live panel at work. Mark's tools were simple, legal, and terrifying. He imaged the device, dug into app caches and cloud sync residue, piecing together fragments like a puzzle with missing pieces. "Don't expect miracles," he warned. "Deleted is usually deleted, but most people aren't as thorough as they think." He was right. We didn't get a full conversation, but we got breadcrumbs, contact initials that appeared over and over, calendar entries that made no sense, half-synced image, thumbnails the size of a postage stamp. One contact was saved as a single letter, G. Another entry held a hotel address I recognized from a billboard off the interstate. In one thumbnail, 2 wine glasses clinked over a marble tabletop with a patterned runner I'd seen before in a hotel lobby that marketed itself as a discreet urban retreat. I didn't print anything. I didn't shout. I thanked Mark, drove home, and tucked a blanket around the empty couch where my son usually watched cartoons. The next day, I tested another angle. I called the agency line during lunch, asking casually if Gregory Lane was available. "He's traveling this week," the receptionist said, but my notes showed he had hosted an all-hands meeting the night before. Traveling or hosting, but not both. I underlined it twice. That evening when Madeline showered, I sat on the closet floor and pulled out a box of old travel receipts. I wasn't hunting for her mistakes. I was hunting for my courage. Instead, I found an envelope embossed with the hotel's initials. Inside, a loyalty upgrade voucher and a handwritten note. "See you Friday. Same corner, same view. G." I took a photo of it, slid everything back exactly as I'd found it. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. I needed a plan she couldn't twist into paranoia. That plan came from an unexpected place, Gregory's wife, Elena. We'd hosted their family for barbecues. I'd seen our kids play tag in the backyard. It took 3 nights before I dialed her number, standing in the dark kitchen with the phone cold against my cheek. "Elena, it's Daniel," I said when she answered. "I need to ask you something, and I hope I'm wrong." She didn't hang up. She listened while I explained the late nights, the wiped messages, the hotel note. On the other end, I heard a sharp inhale. Then she whispered, "I'm looking at Gregory's phone right now. He's in the shower, and he never deletes anything." We agreed on two things instantly. First, no tipping our hand until we had undeniable proof. Second, protect our children from the details until we knew exactly what we were facing. Later that night, she texted me from a different number, found threads, months long. Pet names I don't recognize, photos I won't describe, check your email. When I opened the files, my hands felt foreign on the keyboard. Dates, locations, a rhythm that matched the heartbeat in my notebook. The gaps were obvious, two liars covering their tracks, but the outline was there. A 2-year affair woven through client dinners and off-site meetings. I built a timeline the way I would build a project schedule, aligning her claims with his travel, the hotel's perks with her sudden generosity about me time. The spreadsheet was cold, precise, and devastating. That night she stood in the doorway of my home office, hair damp, towel draped around her shoulders, phone in hand. "What are you working on?" she asked. "Documentation," I said evenly. "For something that needs to be fixed." Her brow furrowed. "You're scaring me." I closed the laptop. Good, maybe now we're finally feeling the same thing. The first time I called Elena Lane, I half expected her to hang up before I even finished my name. She answered on the third ring, her voice polite but taut, the way you speak to an unfamiliar number you don't trust. "Elena, it's Daniel Hayes," I began, steadying my voice. I think we need to talk about Gregory and Madeline." Silence, not confusion, more like the sound of someone holding their breath. Then softly, "Go on." I told her about the late nights, the wiped message threads, the hotel envelope with Gregory's initials. I didn't pour out every detail, just enough to let her know I wasn't speculating. I was standing on solid ground. As I spoke, I could hear the muted sounds of her home in the background, a distant TV, a door creaking, the soft shuffle of footsteps. Her answer came low but clear. "I've seen things too," she admitted. "Messages he never meant for me to see, times that didn't add up. I thought I was losing my mind." And just like that, the ground beneath me shifted, not because of the betrayal, but because I realized I wasn't the only one trapped in it. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. We agreed to meet somewhere neutral, away from neighborhoods, away from familiar eyes. We chose a small coffee shop on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one cares who you are as long as you order something. When I walked in, Elena was already there, seated in a corner booth. She looked like she hadn't slept much. No makeup, hair pulled back, faint shadows under her eyes that mirrored my own. On the table before her sat a plain manila folder. We didn't waste time on small talk. She slid the folder toward me. Inside, printouts of messages between Gregory and Madeline, dates and times highlighted in yellow, occasional photographs that made my stomach knot. I recognized the pattern immediately. The weekends Madeline claimed she was visiting her sister, the emergency work trips that lined up perfectly with Gregory's client dinners. "They've been at this for 2 years," Elena said flatly. "I have receipts, hotel bookings, even credit card charges. He never deletes anything. I think he assumes I'll never leave." We talked for nearly 2 hours. It was strange how quickly two strangers could become allies when united by the same wound. There was no flirting, no misplaced intimacy, just strategy. Two people reclaiming control over a story that had been written without our consent. By the time we left, we had a plan. We would keep collecting evidence quietly and methodically. We would not confront them until the timing was right, until their lies could no longer be bent into another version of the truth. And when that day came, we would make sure it happened on our terms, not theirs. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief, that was still a long way off. But I no longer felt completely alone in the storm. Betrayal is a lonely place. But sometimes, having someone else standing in the same rain makes the wind a little less brutal. And for the first time in weeks, I knew I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. The unraveling didn't come as one dramatic revelation. It came in fragments, scattered like puzzle pieces falling into place one at a time. Over the next few weeks, Elena and I became archivists of our own heartbreak. She had access to Gregory's laptop when he left it unlocked. I had Madeline's old backup phone and a growing obsession with digging through public records, travel points, and anything else that left a digital shadow. Every new discovery felt like another cut, small but deep enough to remind me why I couldn't stop. We created a shared, password-protected folder online. Each subfolder was labeled only by a date. Inside were screenshots of messages, clipped receipts, hotel bookings, and geotagged images from photos they'd sent each other. Elena found a calendar invite for a strategy retreat at a boutique hotel. I matched it to the same weekend Madeline swore she was attending a marketing conference out of state. Both trips were less than 40 minutes from our homes. The most damning evidence came from a forgotten cloud sync. Gregory's account contained entire conversation threads, not the sanitized, surgically cleaned messages I'd seen on Madeline's phone, but the uncut version. Messages that stretched past midnight, full of private jokes, pet names, and plans for their next getaway. Pictures taken in hotel rooms I recognized from loyalty program emails. Then came the line that seared itself into my memory. Gregory had written, "Feels like we've been doing this forever." Madeline replied, "Almost 2 years, babe, and worth every risk." 2 years, 2 years of anniversaries, birthdays, and family dinners, all under the same roof while she was living a second life. When we finally had enough, Elena and I met again at the same corner booth in that coffee shop. The folder between us felt heavier than paper. It was the weight of certainty. "This is it," I told her. "No more wondering, no more giving them room to twist this into something it's not." She nodded, her hands clasped tightly together. "We served them at the same time, no warning, no chance to run. We chose the date carefully. Gregory and Madeline had another weekend booked at one of their regular hotels. Elena confirmed the reservation by calling the front desk, posing as Gregory's assistant. I reached out to a friend in local law enforcement to learn exactly how serving divorce papers in public worked, and how to make sure it was legal, calm, and final. The plan was simple. We would wait in the lobby with our process servers. They would walk in expecting privacy and walk out holding the end of their marriages. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table, looking over the printed messages one last time. I didn't feel rage anymore. Rage burns fast and fades. This was colder, heavier. The kind of resolve that settles in your bones after carrying the weight long enough to know you won't drop it. When morning came, I dressed simply. A plain button-down, dark jeans, and the steady calm of a man who was done asking questions. The hotel lobby was quiet when I arrived, all polished wood, soft lighting, and the faint scent of expensive coffee. Elena walked in moments later, her expression unreadable. She carried her own envelope, and we didn't need to speak. When the elevator doors opened and they stepped out, Madeline in a bathrobe, Gregory just behind her, time slowed. Shock flashed across her face, then confusion, then something I couldn't name. The process server stepped forward. "Madeline Hayes?" he asked calmly. She hesitated, then nodded. Papers changed hands. Elena's turn came next. Madeline's eyes darted between me and the envelope in her hands. "What is this?" she demanded. "You know exactly what it is," I said. And in that moment, watching her realize the life she'd been living in secret had just been dragged into the light, I understood something. This wasn't the moment I lost my marriage. That had happened long ago in the quiet betrayals that built into 2 years of lies. This was simply the moment I stopped pretending it was still alive. The idea of confronting Madeline and Gregory in a way they couldn't slip away from didn't come from anger alone. It came from exhaustion. I was done with the half-truths, the shifting narratives, the way they could still control the story. This wasn't going to be a shouting match they could spin into a jealous husband tale. It was going to be deliberate, precise, undeniable. Elena and I treated it like a joint operation. We sat down with calendars, tracking their movements as if mapping a supply chain. Gregory was a creature of habit, same hotels, same nights of the week, same excuses about client meetings. Madeline had started shadowing his schedule almost perfectly, as if they'd synchronized their lives. We circled one particular weekend, a booking at one of their preferred hotels, far enough from home to justify an overnight stay, but close enough that we could both be there without suspicion. Elena confirmed the reservation by calling the hotel, pretending to be Gregory's assistant and inquiring about an upgrade for the boss and his wife. The clerk happily confirmed the date, the room type, and even the view. The next step was ensuring the confrontation would be public, not in a dramatic hallway ambush, but in a controlled environment with witnesses. I contacted a friend in the sheriff's department and asked about the legality of serving divorce papers in a hotel lobby. He assured me it was perfectly fine, as long as it was calm and non-disruptive. Then, without me even asking, he offered to be there off-duty, just in case. We planned our positions. We'd arrive separately early and sit in opposite corners of the lobby. We wouldn't speak or acknowledge each other until it was done. The process server would be stationed centrally, ready to step forward at the exact moment they appeared. I prepared myself mentally in ways I never had before. I printed the papers twice, kept one set in my bag and another in the glove compartment. I rehearsed my responses, short, controlled sentences. I knew what I would say if she tried to talk to me, and I knew what I wouldn't say. I wasn't there for closure. I was there for the truth to finally stand in the open. The night before, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying 16 years of memories like an old home movie. Our wedding day, holding Ethan for the first time. Lily falling asleep in Madeline's lap on a long drive home. And then the last 2 years. The laughter I wasn't part of. The phone calls taken in another room. The lies delivered so smoothly they could have been rehearsed. By morning, I felt an unexpected calm. Not joy, not relief, just a steady resolve. I put on a plain button-down, dark jeans and the kind of neutral expression you wear when you're running errands, not dismantling a marriage. Before leaving, I paused at the doorways of my kids' rooms. They were still asleep, unaware that the day ahead would change the shape of our family forever. I made a quiet promise to myself. Whatever happened today, I would protect them from this as much as I could. When I arrived at the hotel, the lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. Soft music drifted from hidden speakers, and the sound of a small fountain bubbled in the corner. It was the kind of place designed to make secrets feel safe. Elena entered a few minutes later, sunglasses covering her eyes, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense knot. She didn't look at me, but I caught the smallest tilt of her chin in acknowledgement. The process server arrived shortly after, a man in his 50s with a calm, unshakable demeanor. He sat near the front desk, leather folder resting on his lap. And then we waited. Every elevator ding, every click of heels on marble made my pulse quicken, but I wasn't jittery. I was ready. The trap was set, the timing perfect. All that remained was for the elevator doors to open and for the truth to step into the light. The elevator dinged. In that instant, the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Madeline stepped out first, her hair slightly tousled, a white bathrobe cinched hastily at the waist. She froze mid-step when her eyes landed on me, confusion flickering into shock so quickly it felt cinematic. Gregory followed a heartbeat later, wearing a faintly smug smile, the kind that faltered the moment he spotted Elena standing across the room. The process server moved with calm precision, his voice steady and professional. Madeline Hayes? She blinked, her gaze darting between me and the stranger addressing her. Yes, her voice cracked slightly. He extended the envelope. You've been served. Her fingers closed around the papers automatically, her eyes still locked on mine. Daniel, what is this? Her tone was low, sharp, the one she used when she wanted control of the room. I didn't give her that control. You know exactly what it is. Before she could respond, the process server turned to Gregory. Gregory Lane? Elena stood now, her movement deliberate, her eyes never leaving her husband's face. You've been served, she said herself, handing him his own envelope with hands that didn't shake. Gregory's jaw tightened as if he was considering shoving the papers back. Instead, he tucked them under his arm with a muttered, "This is ridiculous." Madeline took a step toward me, her hand reaching for my arm. Daniel, please. I stepped back. Don't. Her voice wavered. We can talk about this. There's nothing left to talk about. My words weren't angry, they were final. Across the lobby, my off-duty sheriff friend shifted his stance, a silent reminder that this was not the place for a scene. Madeline's gaze flicked around the room at the older couple by the fireplace, the business traveler at the check-in desk, the concierge pretending to type while clearly following every word. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that this was public, that she wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. Gregory tried to salvage his bravado, placing a hand on her back as if to steer her toward the elevators. She shrugged him off without looking at him, her eyes still fixed on me. I didn't wait to hear what she would say next. I gave Elena a single nod, then turned for the door. As I passed my friend, he met my eyes, a look equal parts approval and warning. Don't look back. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. More unchained. The weight wasn't gone, but it had shifted. Through the glass doors, I caught one last glimpse of Madeline still standing in the lobby, envelope clutched in her hand, her expression unreadable. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something. Her next move didn't matter to me anymore. When I got home, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the walls know what's happened. The kids were in their rooms, still blissfully unaware of the scene that had unfolded at the hotel. I lingered in the hallway for a moment, listening to the faint sound of Ethan's video game and the soft hum of Lily's music through her door. For now, their world was still intact. I dropped my jacket over the back of the couch and sat down, staring at the empty coffee table. My phone sat there, screen dark, but I could feel the weight of what was coming. The first call came less than an hour later. Madeline, I didn't answer. She tried again, then again. Finally, a text, "We need to talk, please." I didn't reply. By late afternoon, my phone was a litany of missed calls, some from her, some from numbers I didn't recognize. I knew one of them had to be Gregory. I ignored them all. Around 6, I heard the sound of tires in the driveway. I didn't have to look to know who it was. The front door opened and Madeline stepped in. She changed out of the bathrobe, but her hair was still damp and her makeup was smudged, whether from tears or haste, I didn't care to know. "Daniel, we can't do this in front of the kids," she said immediately, her voice low, urgent. I didn't move from the couch. "Then don't start." She dropped her bag onto the floor and stood there, looking at me like she was searching for the right opening. "It's not what you think," I laughed, short and humorless. "You've had 2 years to decide what to call it. I'm curious what's the version tonight." Her jaw clenched. "I made mistakes, but you don't understand." "No," I cut in, my voice steady. "I understand perfectly. What I don't understand is how you can walk into this house and pretend you have the right to explain it away." She glanced toward the hallway, lowering her voice further. "Daniel, please, the kids." "The kids," I repeated. "You mean the ones you lied to as easily as you lied to me?" Her eyes glistened, but I could see it wasn't from guilt. It was from the sudden realization that I wasn't giving her any ground. The Madeline I'd known was used to controlling every conversation, bending the truth until it suited her. That was over. When she saw I wasn't going to stand, she exhaled slowly. "You'll hear from my lawyer." I leaned back, almost relieved to hear it. "Good, saves me a call." She hesitated at the door, as if expecting me to stop her. I didn't. She finally left without another word, the sound of the door clicking shut echoing in the silence. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the empty space she'd left behind. I wasn't naive. I knew the real fight was only just beginning. Lawyers, custody, money. But I also knew something else. The hardest part, looking her in the eye and refusing to let her rewrite what she'd done. That was already over. And for the first time, I let myself believe that I might actually win this. The first attempt came the very next morning. I was making coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I saw Madeline, dressed neatly this time, makeup fresh, hair styled as if presentation could erase the events of yesterday. When I didn't open the door immediately, she knocked again, softer this time, as if gentleness might work where force had failed. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "You have 2 minutes," I said flatly. Her smile was small, tentative. "Daniel, I know you're angry, but can we just talk? Not about lawyers, about us." "There is no us," I replied. She flinched but pressed on. We've been together 16 years. We've built a life, a family. You burned that, I interrupted. Her hands fidgeted at her sides. I made mistakes, but Gregory, he doesn't mean anything. It wasn't like. It was exactly like what it was, I said, my voice still calm. 2 years of deliberate choices. Don't shrink it down now because you're scared of losing. Her eyes welled up. I am scared. I'm terrified. I can't lose you, Daniel. I can't lose this family. I almost laughed, not from amusement, but from the sheer audacity. You lost it a long time ago. You just didn't notice until I stopped pretending it was still here. She reached for my hand. I stepped back. Daniel, please, we can fix this. I'll cut all contact with him. We'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever you want. I shook my head. I don't want you to do anything. I just want you to sign the papers. Her composure cracked then, the glossy surface she'd tried to present splintered into raw desperation. You can't throw away 16 years over. Over? I cut in. You don't get to finish that sentence. Not after what I've seen, not after what you said to him, not after 2 years of lying to my face. She wiped at her cheeks quickly, as though erasing the tears might somehow erase the truth. If you walk away from me, Daniel, you'll regret it. I met her eyes without blinking. No, the only thing I regret is not walking away sooner. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something more, but the words didn't come. Finally, she turned and walked down the driveway, her heels clicking against the pavement until the sound faded. I stood there for a moment, the morning air cool against my skin, the smell of coffee still drifting from the kitchen. I felt lighter, not because she was gone, but because the decision was no longer a question. She could try again tomorrow or the day after that, or 100 times more. The answer would never change. It didn't take long for her tone to change. For 3 days, the calls and texts came with the same refrain, "Let's talk, Daniel. We can fix this, please." On the 4th day, the message was different, short, cold. "My lawyer will be in touch." And just like that, the game changed. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside was a formal response to the divorce filing, contesting everything: custody, assets, even the timeline of our separation. According to her, we hadn't been apart for months. We were merely working through a rough patch. It was a lie so bold I almost admired it. I called my attorney, Mark, and read the highlights aloud. He sighed in that weary way lawyers do when they see this kind of thing too often. "She's going to make this ugly," he said. "You ready for that?" I was. At least I thought I was. The first real hit came a week later, a motion filed to freeze certain joint accounts, pending financial review. It was a strategic move meant to apply pressure to make me feel trapped. It didn't work, but it did light a fire. I gathered every bank statement, every receipt, every piece of documentation I had. I wasn't just defending myself. I was building a wall she couldn't climb over. Madeline wasn't subtle about her new approach, either. The next time we crossed paths, at Ethan's soccer game, she didn't even attempt the friendly smile she used to disarm people. Instead, she stood on the opposite side of the field, sunglasses on, arms crossed, whispering to a woman I didn't recognize. Every so often, she'd glance in my direction, her expression unreadable. The message was clear: I'm not begging anymore. I'm coming for you. But here's what she didn't understand. Pleading and fighting are just 2 sides of the same coin when you've already lost. I wasn't playing to avoid a fight anymore. I was preparing to win it. Mark's office smelled faintly of coffee and leather, a mix that always made me feel like important decisions were about to be made. We sat across from each other at his wide oak desk, stacks of documents between us. He tapped one folder with a pen. "If we're going to beat her, we need to be airtight. No missing pieces, no assumptions." I nodded. "I've already pulled every bank statement for the last 5 years. Joint accounts, my accounts, even the kids' college funds." Mark gave a small approving smile. "Good. We'll also need copies of your business records, tax returns, and any proof you have of her affair, texts, emails, photographs, anything." I reached into my briefcase and slid over a thick manila envelope. "It's all in here: screenshots, hotel receipts, even the travel itinerary she sent Gregory." He flipped through the first few pages and whistled softly. "This is thorough. Exactly what we need." The rest of the afternoon became a kind of strategic triage. We mapped out timelines, highlighted inconsistencies in her story, and listed every possible witness. Elena was already on board, willing to testify about the affair and even about conversations Madeline had tried to keep quiet. Mark leaned back after an hour of note-taking. She's going to try to paint herself as the victim. That's her pattern, play the wounded spouse. Claim she was neglected. We need to preempt that. I knew he was right. I'd seen that side of Madeline before, the side that could turn an audience in her favor with a few well-placed tears and a carefully edited version of events. We also discussed custody. That was the part I refused to compromise on. The kids stay with me, I said firmly. Mark's eyes met mine, and I saw the flicker of respect there. Then we fight for it. By the time I left his office, the sun was low in the sky, painting the parking lot in shades of orange and gold. The weight of what lay ahead was still there, but it no longer felt suffocating. I had a plan. I had proof. I had people willing to stand beside me. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't just reacting to her moves. I was making my own. The first day in court felt like stepping into a battlefield where words were the weapons and silence was the trap. The air in the courtroom was cool, almost sterile, yet heavy with the weight of unspoken grudges. The sound of shuffling papers, the creak of leather chairs, the measured footsteps of the bailiff, everything seemed louder in that tension. Madeline was already there when I walked in, sitting beside her attorney at the plaintiff's table. She was dressed sharply, hair pinned back, posture perfect, the picture of composure. But I knew her well enough to see the faint tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers tapped lightly against her knee. She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she leaned in to whisper something to her lawyer, who nodded without expression. When her eyes finally met mine, they didn't hold the softness of the pleading days. They were cold, calculating, the look of someone determined to rewrite the story. Mark, my attorney, leaned closer as we sat down. Remember, no reactions. Let her play her part. We stick to facts. The judge entered and everyone rose. His gaze swept the room with quiet authority before he took his seat. Madeline's lawyer went first, painting her as the wronged spouse, neglected, lonely, pushed into the arms of someone who made her feel alive again. I could almost predict each line before it came, the script so familiar from the months of strained conversations before this day. When it was our turn, Mark's voice was steady but edged with steel. He didn't waste time on emotion. Instead, he laid out the evidence piece by piece, hotel receipts, messages, timelines that made her version crumble. At one point, the judge raised an eyebrow, looking from the document in front of him to Madeline. She shifted in her chair just slightly, but I saw it. The crack in the armor. Still, she didn't falter completely. When her lawyer cross-examined me, they tried to corner me into admitting fault, late nights at work, missed anniversaries, anything to hint that I had driven her away. I answered each question calmly, truthfully, not because I was trying to look perfect, but because I had nothing to hide. By the time we recessed for lunch, the room still buzzed with unspoken tension. No one had won yet, but I could feel the momentum shifting. As we packed up our papers, I glanced across the room. Madeline was watching me, her expression unreadable, not pleading, not victorious, just waiting. And I knew this was only the beginning. The second day in court started like the first, tense, calculated, every word chosen with surgical precision. But by mid-morning, everything shifted. Mark had been waiting for this moment. He called Elena to the stand. Madeline's eyes flicked toward her sister as she walked forward, hand raised for the oath. For the first time since these proceedings began, I saw something in Madeline's expression that looked like fear. Elena sat down, posture straight, voice steady. Mark wasted no time. "Ms. Turner, can you tell the court what you know about the relationship between your sister, Madeline, and a man named Gregory Hayes?" Elena took a breath. "They were having an affair. It started at least 2 years ago. I know because Madeline told me herself." Madeline's lawyer was on his feet instantly. "Objection, hearsay." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled, continue." Mark leaned in slightly. "Did she ever tell you where they met?" "Yes, at hotels. Sometimes in the city, sometimes out of town. She even bragged about how clever she was, how you'd never find out. The words landed like a blow. I kept my eyes on the table, not because I couldn't look at her, but because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing my reaction. Mark then pulled out a series of printed messages, copies of texts Elena had forwarded to me weeks ago. The judge read them silently, his expression flattening as the tone of those messages became clear. Madeline shifted again, her hands twisting in her lap. When it was the defense's turn to cross-examine, Madeline's lawyer tried to rattle Elena, suggesting she had a personal grudge, that she was embellishing details to hurt her sister. But Elena didn't waver. "I'm here because the truth matters," she said simply. "He deserves to know what she's done, and the kids deserve better than this mess." By the time Elena stepped down, the courtroom felt different. The quiet had changed. It wasn't just tension now, it was awareness. The judge had heard something that couldn't be unseen or undone. As we broke for recess, Mark leaned over to me. That was the crack we needed. I nodded, the weight in my chest feeling just a little lighter. For months, it had been her word against mine. Now, for the first time, it was her word against the truth, and the truth had just spoken under oath. If the first half of the trial felt like a war over truth, the second half was a battle for my children. From the moment the custody hearings began, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. This wasn't about hotel receipts or text messages anymore. This was about where Ethan and Lily would sleep at night, who would make their school lunches, who would be there when they woke from a nightmare. Madeline's lawyer opened strong, painting her as the nurturing mother who had been the primary caregiver since birth. She spoke softly when the kids were mentioned, her eyes glistening at just the right moments. If I hadn't lived the last 2 years of our marriage, I might have believed her. Mark countered with facts, schedules, records, even testimonies from teachers and coaches. He showed that I had been the one attending parent-teacher conferences, driving to soccer games, sitting through school plays while Madeline claimed she was working late. When the court-appointed child advocate took the stand, my stomach tightened. This was the person the judge trusted to give an unbiased view of what was best for the kids. Her testimony cut through the performance on both sides. The children have a stronger day-to-day bond with their father. He has provided more stability in the past 2 years. While they love their mother, they have expressed a preference to remain primarily in his care. Madeline's jaw clenched, and for a second the mask slipped. Then came her turn to testify. She spoke of love and sacrifice, of staying up all night when the kids were sick, of the little traditions only a mother could create. But under cross-examination, Mark led her into corners she couldn't escape. "Mrs. Turner, is it true you were out of town on the weekend of Ethan's championship game?" She hesitated. "I had a work trip." "And is it also true that you were with Mr. Hayes during that trip?" The objection was immediate, but the damage was done. The judge had heard it. By the time closing statements began, I could see the shift. This wasn't just my fight anymore, it was the kids' stability, their safety, their sense of home. As we left the courthouse that day, I caught Madeline looking at me. No calculation, no defiance this time, just something quieter. Maybe fear, maybe realization. Either way, I knew the decision that would come wasn't going to be the one she wanted. By the 3rd week of the trial, it was obvious to everyone Madeline was losing. Her case had cracks she couldn't patch, witnesses who wouldn't bend the truth for her, and a judge who had started asking her the kind of pointed questions that didn't have safe answers. That's when she made her last move. It started with a rumor. Mark called me late one night. "She's planning something for tomorrow's hearing," he said. "I don't have all the details, but it smells like a setup. Be ready for anything." I barely slept. By morning, I walked into the courthouse with my guard up, my mind racing through every possibility, a fabricated story, a sudden witness, a stunt designed to sway public sympathy. I didn't have to wait long. As soon as the session began, her lawyer requested to introduce new evidence, a series of photographs, printed and neatly arranged in a folder. The first image showed me at a cafe, sitting across from a woman. The second, leaving the cafe with her. The third, a blurry shot of me unlocking my car for her. Madeline's lawyer let the images linger in the air before speaking. This, Your Honor, is evidence of Mr. Turner engaging in an inappropriate relationship during the separation period, which directly calls into question his moral fitness for primary custody. I almost laughed. The woman in the photos was Julia Bennett, a paralegal who worked in Mark's office, and the meeting had been about organizing my case files. Mark stayed calm, his voice even. Your Honor, we anticipated this might happen. Here are the receipts from that cafe billed to my office account. Here is MS, Bennett's employment verification, and here are the email chains scheduling the meeting for legal purposes. The judge glanced between the two sets of documents. Counselor, is there any evidence beyond these photographs to suggest misconduct? Madeline's lawyer hesitated. Not at this time. The judge's tone cooled. Then we will strike this from consideration, and I suggest both parties remember this is a custody hearing, not a tabloid. Across the aisle, Madeline's expression shifted, not anger, not embarrassment, but something emptier, like she had just played her last card and realized the deck was gone. When we left the courtroom for recess, Mark looked at me with a faint smirk. That was it. She's out of ammunition. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, all I felt was relief that this desperate swing had missed, and that the fight was almost over. Almost. The morning of the final hearing felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but heavier in a way that promised closure. The courtroom was quieter than usual. No whispers, no shuffling. Even Madeline seemed still, sitting at her table, hands folded on top of a legal pad she hadn't written on in days. The judge began by summarizing the case, the timelines, the testimonies, the evidence. Hearing it laid out in order made everything sharper. Months of chaos condensed into a sequence of facts that left little room for doubt. When he turned to custody, I could feel my pulse in my throat. The court finds, he began, that the children's best interests are served by remaining primarily in the father's care. He has demonstrated consistent involvement, stability, and the ability to provide a supportive home environment. The mother will have scheduled visitation rights. Madeline didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the bench, but her grip on the pen in her hand tightened until her knuckles whitened. Then came the financial rulings, no alimony, a fair division of assets, and the order for her to contribute to the children's expenses according to her income. It was measured, impartial, but decisive. When the gavel came down, it didn't echo like in the movies. It was a dull, final sound, but to me it might as well have been thunder. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Mark leaned over and whispered, "It's done, you won." But it didn't feel like winning, not exactly. It felt like standing on the far side of a long, brutal road looking back at the wreckage. As we stood to leave, I glanced at Madeline one last time. She was staring at the floor, her face unreadable. No fight left, no more plays to make. Outside, the air felt different, crisper, clearer. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe without the weight of a battle pressing on my chest. The war was over. Walking out of the courthouse that afternoon felt surreal. The sky was a pale blue, the kind you don't notice on ordinary days but remember on the important ones. Mark shook my hand firmly. "Take the weekend. Breathe. Let it sink in," he said before heading toward the parking lot. I stood there for a moment, just letting the sun warm my face. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about surviving and now finally living. When I got home, Ethan and Lily were waiting. They didn't know all the details, and they didn't need to. All they knew was that I was here and I wasn't going anywhere. Ethan handed me a drawing he'd made at school, the three of us standing in front of our house, smiling. Lily threw her arms around me and didn't let go for a long time. The house felt different that night. Quieter, yes, but not empty. More like it had been reset, the air cleared of months of tension. Over the next few weeks, life began to take shape again. I started cooking more, taking the kids to the park after school, and slowly putting the pieces of our routine back together. Friends dropped by, some with congratulations, others just to sit on the porch with me in comfortable silence. There were moments when the weight of everything would still hit me, the years lost, the betrayal, the court battles. But those moments were softer now, easier to carry. One evening, I stood in the backyard watching the kids chase each other across the grass. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows, and for the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about the next fight. I was just here. The war was over. And this was the part where we started living again. 2 months after the verdict, life had found its rhythm again. Mornings were about packing lunches and rushing out the door for school drop-offs. Evenings were about homework at the kitchen table and bedtime stories. It was a Tuesday night when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me swipe the screen. The message was short. "We need to talk. It's about Madeline." For a second, I just stared at it, my thumb hovering over the reply button. My first thought was that it was some kind of prank. My second thought, less comforting, was that maybe it wasn't. I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. I set the phone down and tried to focus on helping Lily with her math homework, but my eyes kept drifting toward the glowing screen on the counter. 10 minutes later, another buzz. "She's in trouble. And if you don't help, it's going to get worse for her, and maybe for you too." That time, my pulse kicked up. I stepped into the hallway and called the number, but it went straight to voicemail. Mark was the first person I thought to call. When I read him the messages, he didn't laugh or brush them off. "Could be nothing," he said, "or it could be someone trying to pull you back in. Either way, don't respond again. Screenshot everything and send it to me." I did as he said, but even after the kids went to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I'd fought a long, brutal war to get my life back. But now, it felt like a shadow from that war had just stepped back into my light. Life didn't return to normal after that message. But maybe that was a good thing. I never found out who sent it, at least not right away. Mark kept digging, but weeks passed without another word. In the meantime, I kept my world small: work, the kids, and the quiet moments in between. The shadow of that text was still there, lingering at the edges of my mind. But it didn't control me, not this time. Some nights after the kids went to bed, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and think about what future meant now. It wasn't about going back to the life I had before that life was gone. It was about building something better, something honest, even if it was slower, smaller, and not always easy. Ethan started high school that fall. Lily joined the school's drama club. I was there for every game, every performance, every late-night project. And with each small win, I felt the past losing its grip. Then, one Saturday morning, I got another message. Different number this time, just one sentence. "She's leaving town, thought you should know. No threats, no demands, just that." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I set the phone down and went back to making pancakes with Lily, who was standing on a stool, laughing as she tried to flip one without breaking it. That was my life now, not waiting for the next fight, but living in the moments that mattered. The past had taken enough from me. The future, that was mine to write. And that's how a marriage that once felt unshakable came to an undeniable end. It wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about reclaiming my life, my peace, and my future. In the end, the truth didn't just set me free. It gave my children and me a chance to build something better. What about you? If you were in my place, would you have confronted them in public or walked away quietly? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching Cheating Stories 7. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Until next time, take care and choose honesty over illusion.